Welcome back to the Sunday Recap. This is Pastor Mitch hanging out here with Pastor Jon.
What's up?
Hey, we're going to switch our roles a little bit today, which is, I think, pretty unique just for our relationship in general, where I'm going to try to do more of the question asking, less of the talking, and Jon's going to do more of the question answering and the talking today. Because Jon preached on Sunday at Ascend. Bro, nothing but like great feedback. It's been so encouraging to hear it.
Yeah.
Especially for those of you that serve in our church, if you've ever been like in the kids ministry on Sunday morning, when you're in kids ministry, you have no idea what happens in the rest of the church.
Nope.
You have no idea who's there. You have no idea what's been said. But I listened back to it in the afternoon in preparation for today, man. And I just think like the Lord worked through your sermon. Like it was a real blessing.
Praise the Lord.
To our church. So yeah. So we're going to jump right in. I'm excited for today's discussion. We're going to work through the passage a little bit, just try to address some things that maybe those of you who are newer to the Bible, you might come across words in this passage and go, I don't know what that means. Yeah. So we want to kind of make sure we cover those. And then we're going to go super application heavy at the end. You left people in a really good place to pray about how they do these things.
Yeah.
And so I think the next step is like, let's dialogue around how do we live a life of ministry like Jesus.
Yeah,
so
sounds good.
Yeah. So I'll read for us today. If you have a copy of God's word, I'd encourage you to open it. We're going to be in Mark chapter 1, verses 35 through 45. The passage begins and it says this: "And rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him, and they found him and said to him, 'Everyone is looking for you.' And he said to them, 'Let us go to the next town, that I may preach there also, for that is why I came out.' And he went throughout all of Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and casting out demons." Verse 40, "And a leper came to him, imploring him, and kneeling, said to him, 'If you will make me clean, make me clean.' Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, 'I will be clean.'" A lot of like the commas in this section really matter here, don't they?
Yeah.
"And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. And Jesus sternly charged him and sent him away at once, and said to him, 'See that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded for a proof to them.' But he went out and began to talk freely about it, and to spread the news, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter a town, but was out in a desolate place, and people were coming to him from every quarter." Man, I hope you guys got some of what I just read there, because that one was
we'll
all
walk
over
through
the
it.
place. Yeah,
We'll
walk
get
through
it.
the story. Recap it for us for a minute.
All right, so even backing up even further from 35, Jesus is in the synagogue. He's teaching. He casts out a demon. He then goes to Simon and Andrew's house and heals Simon's mother-in-law from a fever. And then where our story picks up is the next morning.
Yeah.
And it says Jesus is out in a desolate place praying. I mean, I made a joke in the sermon. It's like, I would have taken the day off.
Yeah,
I would have slept in.
Yeah. What do you do? What do you do after a busy day of ministry?
Yeah.
Yeah, sleep in.
And I would have slept in. I would have taken the day to myself. But Jesus is almost like rejuvenated and like it energizes him to go and be with his Father.
Yeah.
Like, this relationship is super tight, and it's like what he desires to do.
Yeah. And we shared this, earlier in the series, but when we look at Jesus's life, we often want to look at what Jesus does and then how it relates to us, which is an appropriate way to read the Bible. But sometimes it's beneficial to look at Jesus's example and say, what did Jesus do? And then how can I do that in my own life? And I think that this passage is probably one of the like most used passages in that instance, right? So we see Jesus in the morning. He retreats to pray to the Father.
He retreats to reconnect. And it says he's in a desolate place, which is the same word used for wilderness earlier in the chapter. So he's in the middle of nowhere. There's nobody around. There's nothing there. No lights at the time, so it's pitch black because it says it was still night outside. And then the disciples come looking for him.
Yeah.
And the way that it's worded is it's like it took a long time to find him.
Mhm.
So he's had a few hours of one-on-one time with the Father. And then when they finally find him, where have you been? We're all looking for you. There's stuff you've got to be doing. There's ministry to attend to. And Jesus simply says, that's not why I've come.
Yeah. So why has he came?
He says, I'm here to preach. He says, let's go to the next town so I can preach there also.
Yeah.
And so everywhere he's going, he's being misunderstood for why he's here. He's not here to heal.
Mm-hmm.
It is a result of why he's here, but that's not why he's here.
Yeah.
And even the disciples, those closest to him, are missing that point.
Yep.
That he's not here to just take care of the physical ailments. Mm-hmm. He's here to preach the good news. Yeah. Verse 15, the kingdom is at hand. Repent and believe the gospel.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Jesus' primary ministry is to preach the gospel.
Right.
Which we talked about this on our last couple podcast episodes and in the sermon, that we, again, people were so at risk to chase Jesus for what he does rather than who he is. Mm-hmm. And so Jesus is here for so much more than a healing ministry. And he heals because he's moved with compassion. In this case, the verse that uses pity.
Yeah. So it says pity in the ESV, and other translations it's compassion.
Yeah.
Most of them are. And then we talked a little bit yesterday about how some of them even say he's moved in anger, which seems completely different.
Yeah, address that, because I liked your take on that.
Yeah, so
I've not done the commentary digging to see where it comes from, but I liked what you were saying.
Yeah, so essentially, whatever the emotion is, whether it's pity, compassion, or indignation, or like anger, it is coming from inside. It is coming from every fiber of his being. He is feeling this.
Yeah.
And the way that I have understood it is that he's having compassion on the leper. He loves the person who is sitting right in front of him, kneeling and begging him to heal. Mm-hmm. And then for those other translations, that the anger is not directed at the leper. For inconveniencing
he's not just inconvenienced.
Right.
Yeah.
He's not annoyed. He is angry at the results of sin.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. If the reason he's come is to preach the gospel, sin is the antithesis of the gospel, right? Yeah. Like it's the opposite. So
preach. Man's preaching right now.
He is angry at the effects of sin on this world. He's more angry at the leprosy, the disease, because that's the result.
Which leads me to my next question. We don't want to ever assume, and this is kind of one of the purposes of the podcast, is we can deep dive into things that those that are with us that you might not have grown up in the church. Like if you grow up in the church, like this is a super familiar story. Like why do we in 2025, that most of us that have been in church our whole life, you can say, what's leprosy? And we all have an answer. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just because we've been hearing this story our entire life, but that's not true for everyone. Mm-hmm. So what is leprosy?
So leprosy was a skin condition, but there were actually over 70 different types of skin conditions that would be classified as leprosy. If you want to dig even further, you can go read Leviticus 13 and 14, because essentially the priest was in charge of determining whether or not a skin condition was leprosy or if it was just like a scab on your arm. Yeah. So they would have, if they woke up, they had something weird on their skin, they would go to the priest. Yeah. And it was the priest's job to determine, is this leprous or is this just like you got scratched and it's scabbing over.
And it was considered contagious.
Correct. Yeah. So it's a terrible disease where like your skin's like hanging. In some cases it's recorded that people's nose would fall off. Wow. Like just like it attacks the soft tissue where like the body starts to fall apart. Yeah.
So pretty terrible. Nobody wants to be around this guy. He's considered an outcast in society. Yeah. This will blow your mind. So I was in elementary yesterday in our elementary class, and I asked them about leprosy, and my wife, JC, was in there teaching with me. And she said, who in the room has had chicken pox? And like, we didn't recognize it. Like none of them. Yeah. So like, even for me, like the closest example I could come up with was chicken pox, but now due to like, kids being vaccinated from chicken pox, it was like the elementary kids were like,
what's chicken pox?
I have no idea what chicken pox is. And like, so it's just funny. Like it was,
where we all have that childhood trauma where we're like,
oh yeah, I remember
your
like
friend
you couldn't
has
be around
chicken pox.
anybody.
Let's go get chicken pox so we get rid of it.
But yeah, so he's an outcast.
Yeah.
He's completely, I mean, like he's in the shallows. He can't, come in society. Here he finds Jesus. Jesus heals him, and then what's he go do?
The leper.
Yeah, what's Jesus ask him to do? Let's say first.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, let's just talk about he's not even supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Like he's outcast. He's supposed to be, there are laws that he's not even supposed to be within 50 paces of anybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And social distancing
then
in the ancient world.
That's right. The ancient world of social distancing. But he's falling down at Jesus's feet. So he's right there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Jesus is willing to cleanse him.
Yeah.
He heals him, and he tells him to not say anything to anyone, but go to the priest and offer your offering because of Leviticus 13 and 14.
Yeah.
It was in their law that there's still an offering that has to be offered as thanks to God. The priest still has to proclaim him as clean to come back into the religious circle.
Yeah. Wow.
So Jesus, even though, he breaks the ceremonial law by touching this man, and he, even letting him be within that distance, he then is not throwing out the law completely.
Yeah.
He's saying, no, the law.
Yeah.
Go to the priest.
Yeah.
Have him pronounce you clean and give your offering.
Yeah.
And so the man, I don't know if he's on his way to the priest.
Yeah.
But it says he goes and tells everybody, speaks freely about it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the commentators I read says he's an evangelist in disobedience.
Yeah.
Like he's going and he's telling the good news.
Yeah.
He's preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
Even though he was told not to.
Yeah. And this comes back to, again, the question is like, why would Jesus want to hide this? And there's a ton of theological discussion around, the messianic secret, but even sit all that aside. I think what we're saying here is that Jesus is aware that people will be chasing him for things other than what he's came here to do. Yeah. And so he, this really creates the situation where most of his ministry happens on the outskirts from here forth. It doesn't happen in the presence of the city.
Right.
Because he's recognizable now, as the healer.
His fame has spread far and wide, and he can no longer openly enter a city.
So let's transition here for me, because this is what I want to help people do. Because we talked about this a bit last week. We talked about how do we read a text like this and then apply it to our lives appropriately. I want to look at Jesus's example and then say, okay, what aspects do we see Jesus do in this passage that we can take and we can go, okay, we need to apply those to our lives appropriately, knowing that like we're not Jesus, and I don't know if you guys have seen, there's a clip right now that's going around on social media where the guy's being baptized and like he's getting ready to go in the tank, and like they're like, who are you? And he's like, I'm Jesus. And the guy says, like, the pastor's like, oh, wait, what? Yeah. And then they look back at him again and he's like, all right, we're gonna go like, do you believe? He's like, I am him. And you're like, all right, we're going to talk more. But that's not what we're trying to say. It's like, we don't look at everything Jesus does and go, okay, yeah, now I'm Jesus. What we're trying to say is like, there's principles here though, that Jesus is God, but he's also man. And so in many ways, he lives out his life as a human in the perfect way.
Yeah.
So there's things that we see that we can apply. Yeah. Okay. So the first one I think is prayer. We see Jesus go to a desolate place and pray. What would you say, John, if you had like 10 more minutes in application in your sermon? Yeah. I'm not giving you 10 minutes now.
No, you're good.
But if you had it to say, like, this is how I would encourage you to pray like Jesus in this passage.
Yeah. I mean, my most basic encouragement is to just do it.
Yeah.
Like if you're a schedule person, put it on your calendar and do it. Mm-hmm. Like one of the things that I've heard people say is like, well, I pray while I drive, and that's great. If that works. Yeah. Was that you?
I feel attacked. Yeah, this is me, but yeah, you're going. Anyway. I shared this with our small group guys last night. So it's okay. Good. Keep going.
But for me, I'm too distracted.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm a pretty aggressive driver. I'm like telling people what to do and everything else.
No, like, so the point, John,
while I'm trying to pray, I can't be doing that.
Well, and the point that
But-
John's getting at, so he knows this story, and I shared this with our small group last night, but when we were being assessed to be church planters within our network, there was a guy doing our interviewing.
Oh, yeah.
And he asked me, he said, when do you pray? And my response was like, I most often pray when I'm driving. And this guy looks at me, and I do love this guy now, but like, he goes, not enough.
Yeah.
It was like his first response. And I was like, what do you mean? And so we walk out of the room, and JC could tell that it kind of like irked me a little bit.
Yeah.
So she pulls me aside and she's like, hey, like, you know, when he said that, like, what do you think? She's like, well, you know, he's not wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like,
Well,
that's not enough. Yeah.
And again, like, I'm not saying that if
Yeah.
that works, do it. But
Yeah.
I think the main takeaway I would do here is like, find a time where
Yeah.
you can be alone and just pray.
It's the posture of prayer more than it's the obligation,
Yeah.
more than it's the guilt to pray. And that's what we see with Jesus. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus wants to retreat to be in the presence of the Father
Yeah.
to prepare himself. And it's like so often we're going to prayer out of guilt or going out of prayer because we think we should.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily the wins. I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
Like if you say pray in the morning, it's like, well, I'm up at like 5:40 with my boys pretty much every day anyways.
Yeah.
But the reality is if I go to the Lord and pray, it postures myself for how I understand my day and what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know, and so we see Jesus model that. And I think
Yeah.
it's a good encouragement for us,
Yeah.
you know?
You don't sneak away to go do things you don't like.
Yeah. Yep.
And like, yeah, Jesus makes the time to go and do it.
Okay, so Jesus again, we're talking about him praying, then we see this encounter.
Yeah.
You shared how Jesus's movement and being, you know, moved with pity is not like he's angry at the man's presence.
Right.
But I'm always reminded of how like sometimes I can be annoyed. Like when
Right.
things come in my way.
I've got a plan, right?
Yeah.
I've got a place to be.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
it's just a reminder of like we need to always be ready for ministry. Like
Yeah.
our schedule
Yeah.
can be thrown out the window, you know, and at times it should be,
Yeah.
you know. So, all right, I want to. This is the last question I want to ask you.
Okay.
I was talking to some people after the sermon yesterday, and they shared with me again. You did a really good job of explaining what it looks like to have a posture of retreating in prayer
Mhm.
and then living a life of serving other people. What does it mean to live a life of serving other people? Because that's what people
yeah.
were saying. So they're walking away with that. What would you say to those people? Like, yeah, here's some next steps.
Well, I mean, what you were just talking about, always being ready
Yeah.
to live life in ministry. We
Mhm.
talked a lot too yesterday about living on mission.
Yeah.
Like Jesus doesn't get distracted when the disciples come up and say, "We have all this ministry you need to
Yeah.
do." And he's like, "No, I've got a mission to complete,
Yeah.
and it's to go to the next town and preach the gospel there also." And so, like for us, it's being ready to share the hope that you have in Jesus.
Yeah.
And you know, that could be as simple as sharing the gospel with somebody.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as like just showing that you care about the coworker that you see every day and you see that they're having a hard time. It could be taking a meal to your neighbor.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
really
it's-
what you're saying is, and we see this with Jesus, it's like the posture of seeing yourself as a minister.
Yeah.
One who's motivated out of love towards people through the love that we've experienced ourselves through Christ.
Exactly.
And then living it out daily. It's not even so much the plan. I think that's what I would want to encourage people. Like if you left yesterday and you go, oh man, I got to start serving people. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to sign up to serve this Wednesday, you know, at this food pantry. It's like, well, that's not really the point. Like that could be it. And that could be good. It's more the posture of seeing yourself as a minister of the gospel. Like, and what does that mean? It's not just meeting needs. Cause again, that's not what we wanted.
That's not why Jesus is
That's
here.
not why he came. So it's this living a life of having compassion with the people you encounter, but carrying the gospel with you everywhere you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I would even add too, just being empathetic toward other people.
Yep.
Like you have no idea what's going on in the person's head that's blowing up or whatever. We were just talking about people that we knew. And it's like, if we knew then what we knew now about what was going on when they were, when they were in middle school, high school, like we would have so much more compassion toward them and so much more grace. And like, we just need to live that way.
Yep.
Just in general, like you have no idea. And they may be mean to you or whatever, but you are an ambassador of the gospel there to share the good news.
Yep.
Whether it's inconvenient or not.
Yep.
the Lord will give you strength to continue to show love toward
Exactly.
other people.
Yeah. And we should reorient our whole life around it as believers. It's
Yeah.
not a piece of what we do. I mean, I was telling people, we shared the clip yesterday on our social media, but there's this like 2-minute just truth bomb you dropped about, why do we plant churches? Why? Then you go into later, like, why do we live where we live? Why do we spend money the way we spend money?
Yeah.
And again, it all should be motivated by what Jesus has done for us. It's called like a worldview is the idea, but it's like shifting
exactly what
the
it
way
is.
we see the world, that it's not so self-focused, but rather it's others focused, but it's not others focused just based off of obligation or like trying to earn God's love, but it's because we've received it ourselves.
Right.
So yeah.
I mean, you look at Jesus. I mean, we're just beating a dead horse here,
fine.
but it's okay.
No, let's keep going.
So he's got a mission. He's got laser focused vision on it. Like I got to go to the next town and preach the gospel. He does, but he's still got mission to complete. And this leper just like stops right in front of him.
Yeah.
Which completely throws off the schedule, right? Throws off the whole day.
Yeah.
But he has compassion.
Yeah, his presence. It's not a light switch you turn on and off.
Right. It's just
again, church.
ready.
You're not a Christian when you're at church. You're a Christian all day long. Yeah,
24/7.
So again, guys, we are wrestling through these things because we're wrestling through them ourselves. They're not just things that we're challenging you to. They're things that we are constantly being challenged by ourselves. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us this week on the Sunday Recap. Again, if you're a part of our church family, feel free, ask us questions about the text. We'd love to dive into those things more on the podcast. Again, we'd love to see you Sunday mornings, 10 a.m., Meridian 6th Grade Academy. We're going through Mark. We'll be there for a while.
Yeah.
So, yep.
All right.
See you guys next week.
See you Sunday.